As I work on this Bowser 482 kit, I thought it might be fun to do another project alongside it. Some of you may remember a while back that I picked up this Arbour Models A3040 kit, brand new in the box, totally untouched. So, as I make each video of the Bowser steam engine, I will also be making a video showing an equal amount of progress on this one. So, opening things up here, they generally do a good job of packaging things, I'll say. All of the parts are vacuum sealed with this plastic film against cardboard, which protects well against damage. So this is most of your main boiler parts for the steam engine. Let's see, right here in the small box, we've got, let's see, there's the motor with worm on it. Little open frame one. Let's see your tinder wheels. And the rest of the parts here, which is, let's see, an electrical wire. Let's see all the different screws. And what's in here? A few detail parts in the drawbar. And then in this smaller box, you got your, let's see, the main drive wheels in an unnecessarily large amount of packaging. And then the last sleeve here has most of the tinder parts and then the chassis parts for the steam engine. And it looks like they also provided quite a bit of documentation along with this thing. Here's an interesting card. I'll read that a bit later. Let's see. Parts list. Order form for replacement parts, I guess. A few photos of a finished model for reference. And let's see, it looks like this is the main instruction manual here. And they even give you this postcard with a photo of a couple of their assembled models on layout, which honestly looks pretty nice. And then, let's see what that is, the registration card, which at this point is useless. All right, so going back to this card here, this is kind of interesting. Like, model railroading is fun, or is it? Well, yeah, it should be. It's been suggested we may use this cliche too often in literature, advertising by a few model railroaders who found our kits frustrating. A few who found the kits frustrating. Yes, they can be frustrating, exasperating, actually downright hair-pulling, and a pain. Why in the world would anyone want to bring this on themselves? Of more importance to a few customers, why would any manufacturer have the audacity to put on the market a product with these built-in qualities? Qualities? Emphasis on the question mark after qualities. Those are not qualities. Those are mistakes. Do not compare them to any other manufacturer's product. It is not screwdriver assembly. They require persistence, tolerance, and experience to cope with the out of the ordinary. So basically, they're advertising their lack of quality as a quality and saying, yeah, we decided not to put in the effort to make a decent kit, so instead it's up to you to work out our mistakes. Don't buy unless you're ready to embrace the demands of a stimulating, time-consuming adventure. Please take your time to examine all the parts and instructions before you purchase. This was pre-internet, so I don't know how you're going to examine all that before you buy it. Kits are not accepted for return by us or our dealers after purchase. So once it leaves us, it's out of our hands and it's up to you to deal with it. And we are not going to help. We do stand behind the quality of our product, or lack thereof, and we'll replace any defective part without charge. Well, at least they did that much. And remember, model railroading is fun for anyone who's not building one of our kits. Well, that's a very interesting card, very interesting attitude to have. So I'll go ahead and say that I'm actually a product engineer who's come up with quite a few successful products. I'm not going to say which ones, but I've come up with quite a few. And I've made some mistakes here and there, but when I make a mistake, I'll admit to it, and I'll even see about changing the product to fix that mistake for a better customer experience. And I won't just say, oh, I made this mistake on purpose, it's up to you to deal with it. I'll apologize for the mistake I made and then do whatever I can to fix it for that customer. I believe that's the way things should be done. Not just say, oh yeah, we decided not to put any effort into making a good quality kit, threw this out there, and if you have a problem with it, it's your fault. Yeah, it's not really a good attitude for a manufacturer to have, so I think that's part of what led to their downfall. Anyway, moving past that though, let's get on to seeing what we can do about assembling this thing. So of course, start with the chassis, so that'll be this sleeve here. As usual, I'll be starting with the basics here. So to get these parts out of their packaging, you want to take a sharp knife, cut around the plastic, just carefully. After doing that, you should be able to get the part out. There'll be a layer of plastic film left on top. And usually, you can just peel that away. And this is the first time any of these parts have been exposed to oxygen in the 40 years or so since this was manufactured. So everything in here should be pristine. Now get this part out. A little more cutting and trimming to do since this is larger, a little more complicated. Of course, continue to be careful so you don't damage any of the actual metal. Careful not to cut your finger either. Later on, I think they changed to a packaging that used little plastic bubbles instead of this vacuum sealed stuff, so that would have made getting the parts out a little easier. There it goes. Peel that away. Okay, I'll start with these two. So it looks like there's really not much cleanup to do on here. Just some basic bits of flash here and there. See, I think those might be details around there, so I'll leave those on, just carefully clean around them. Okay, well, I'll start out with just filing a bit. This is much softer than the metal that you'll find in Bowser, Mantua, Tyco kits. So you want to be gentle with it. Let's see, that's more flash there. With just a slight pit, so I'll want to fill that in later. I'm barely pushing down on the file at all as I do this. Just being as gentle as possible. Get rid of those seams, any bits of flash. And then take some sandpaper and smooth that out. That should be good enough for now. Also sand around the rest of the surface just a bit. Feel some slight bits of roughness here and there. It's mostly smooth, so it doesn't take much cleanup. Okay, I think I've just about got that cleaned up. I'll take a little more just out of the tops of these slots. And then for the sides, just a bit with the round file. Make sure there's no flash in there. Okay, I think that's clean enough for a start. Now this plate here doesn't look too bad. I just see a bit of flashback here. All right, now this looks kind of like what happened with the 284 that I built before. It has these little blocks, nubs here, which contact the axles. And if it's too tight, you just file these down a bit. So I won't do anything with those until I first tested the wheels. So I'll go ahead and pull those out now. Let's see. Yeah, this should be the, yeah, that's the front. And does not fit. So both of these sides are too wide for the axles. That means I'll have to file these down a little at a time. Before I file out too much, I decided to check the gauge of these wheels and found out that this rear axle here is a bit too narrow, not by much, just a little. So I'll put it in the puller here. And since that's a plastic wheel, that should move very easily. I don't even need the Allen wrench to turn this. All right, close enough. And this axle was fine, so I'll leave it alone. I think I have the sides filed down to the width they need to be. I can move this back and forth just slightly. However, it looks like this slot for the axle is just a bit too small, and I can't actually drop that down inside. So I'll start by just carefully beveling the sides of that, see if that helps. Gotta be careful not to damage the rounded area. Well, yet, anyway. We'll see. It seems like it's wanting to go down in there, but still not quite fitting. If you're doing something like this, you want to make sure to try and do both ends evenly so that you don't throw off the spacing of the axles. Boy, that is really off. I'm just using this bit of tubing here to confirm that it is actually the slot that's too small and that's not the width. And it is definitely the slot. Okay, I've got an 1/8 inch bit in my power drill. Try not to hurt myself. Still not quite there. I'll file out a little more with the flat file. It looks like they did some cleaning out of these slots at the factory. But if they're doing that, you think they could have at least made it so you could actually drop the 1/8 inch axle down in there. But hey, that would have taken effort, and you don't want to put any effort into an expensive kit, do you? Almost there. I can start to turn the wheels. That's a good sign. Looks like I do need to take off just a bit more width. I think from this side would be best. So far, just making this one axle fit is more work than installing all 4 of the drive axles into that Bowser chassis and even getting the bearings aligned. There we go. Width seems to be pretty good here now. So the only resistance left, about the only resistance left, I think, is from the chassis itself, from that axle slot. Take a little more out of there. And notice I'm just holding the file at an angle to make sure I don't damage any of the slot. I'm only getting the edge. Okay, that's feeling pretty good now. Kind of rolls free, but there's still some resistance when I'm actually pressing on the wheel. So it's not a perfect fit, but that is getting very close. There we go. Now we finally got a single rolling axle. Now I'll just do the same for the other one. I finally got the front axle in. Now again, this is taking a decent amount of work just to make it roll, but it's getting close. Just have to take a little more off the side here. Width is fine now. So all that's left is getting that slot opened up enough for something to actually work inside of it. So again, pulling out the drill bit, cleaning that out. Almost there. Now, plenty of manufacturers have made kits where you have to file out the axle slots a bit, but typically that's only necessary when the axles already have separate bearings fitted to them, so then it doesn't matter quite so much if the axle slots aren't perfect, just as long as the bearings fit. These Arbour Models kits are the only ones I've ever come across where you actually have to shape the bearings yourself. There, it's finally working pretty freely. I feel a little roughness there. I think that's coming from the side of the wheel. Let's see. Yeah, maybe I can just file a little out from the back there. Being careful not to damage the gear, of course. There we go. I think this will finally be an okay roller. Some nice squeaking from there, though. Let's get a little oil in that thing. That's not too bad. Yeah, that's actually a pretty smooth roller now. It only took about 15 times the effort of another kit, but it's doable. Now let's see if this plate breaks that. I think I'll only have to take a little bit of those nubs off, but only for the rear axle. The front one has plenty of room to move. So just gently go across that, take off almost nothing at all. There, that's pretty good. And there's how much metal had to be taken off just so those two axles would roll. That's a bit much. Now securing this bottom plate to the chassis is a bit interesting. You have to use these 080 screws, but the screw holes are not tapped. I don't have an 080 tap on hand, so I'm just trying to drive this in directly, which is difficult, of course. So I'm just doing a little at a time, putting the screw in, backing it out, adding a drop of oil each time. And that seems to be working. I've got a fresh drop of oil in, so I'm seeing if I can get the rest of the way down without damaging the screw head, and I think that's about as far as it's going this time. Add another drop of oil. That's a bad sign. And the screw broke inside of the hole, so it looks like I'm going to have to get myself an 080 tap before I can continue with this kit. And as for this one here, well, there's plenty of room around here, so I'll just drill out a new hole for a new screw. Well, I couldn't find an 080 tap in any of the local stores, so I had to order that, and I should have it in a few days anyway. Until then, there are still a couple things that I can do on the chassis. So, one of the things is to prepare the wheels for putting the side rods on. So you can see in there, there's a hex-shaped hole in each of the wheels. So what you do is drop an 080 nut into each of these. Now, of course, that's extremely difficult to do by hand. So what you'll want instead is some pliers or tweezers. Just anything that lets you get a good straight grip on there. And then it should be possible to drop that in straight. And then just lightly squeeze that so that the nut goes all the way in. And then with the nut in place, you of course don't want it dropping out. So what I'm going to do is take just a little bit of super glue here, put a little drop on the end of a wire, and then touch that around the edge of the nut. Wipe that around a little, and then wipe off the excess. So that nut will now stay in place and be ready for inserting the screw for installing the side rods. I just have to do the same for the other three. Also, while I was reading through the instructions again to see if they say anything about using a tap, they do not. Instead they say, screws will self-tap using a tapping procedure, which I'm pretty sure I did that correctly. Of course, they don't say what the tapping procedure is. I checked through and there's no mention of that. They just say use a tapping procedure. And the screw broke. So another little mistake with the kit's design. And while I wait for that tapping tool to come in, I can also at least work on preparing some of these other parts, like the side rods. Get them cleaned up, straightened out. Now with really thin parts like these, I'm going to take special care when removing them, because you don't want to bend or damage them. Let's see if I can get this film off before the rest of it. I don't know if it will come up on its own. I think it's starting to come off. If I pull up on the rods, it could potentially bend them out of shape. So that's why I want to get it out of the, or get the film off of there first, if I can. There we go. Peel that up and off. There's one rod out, totally undamaged and hopefully completely straight. Very thin though, so gotta be very gentle with it, especially since this is made from the soft metal used for the rest of the kit. Not anything hard like brass or nickel. There's just a little bit of stuff left stuck to it, but that peels right off. So there's just a bit of flash in a few areas, but it looks like these won't need too much cleanup. So to get that off, instead of using a file, I'm going to trim it with the knife here. It gets rid of that. And just carefully carve the edges here a bit. Okay, so this rod should be good to use. Looks like it's pretty straight overall. I'll check it on a flat block here. Not quite perfect, but it is close. Just carefully bend that a little. And that's about as far as I can get on these until I can actually finish putting the chassis together to test them out. As I'm getting ready to tap the new screw hole, I just want to mention one more thing. So these screws, even though they say to use thread them in using a tapping procedure, these screws are not self-tapping, so they're definitely not designed for doing that kind of thing. And in addition to that, while I was smoothing that one out, the metal actually filed down really easily, so these are definitely not a hardened grade of steel. These are much softer. So if you're building one of these kits, definitely use a proper tap before you even attempt to thread these into the holes. Okay, so now I've got the drill and tap set. It included a drill bit to match the size of the tap so that all the holes can be exactly the way they need to be. So now what I'll do here is just gently clean out these holes. Then I'll load the tap into my hand chuck here, just so I can be gentle with it. Put a little bit of oil on there. And now, just carefully turn that in the hole. Cuts through the stuff like butter, but you still don't want to go too far with it. Every now and then it's a good idea to back the tap out of there, brush those metal flakes off, and then continue on. So now I've got all the screw holes tapped, and I went ahead and made a new one to replace the one that broke and got stuck inside. And I also filled the hole in the corner there, since that'll no longer be used. I did that with baking soda and super glue. Filed it down, and that should be pretty much unnoticeable. So now I can put this together. Yeah, these turn in nice and smooth now. No difficulty at all. So a drill and tap is definitely the way to go with these. Also, for the last screw hole here, I made a countersink in the hole since these are flat-headed screws. And to do that, I just took a Phillips screwdriver, and since it's a soft metal there, all I had to do was kind of twist it back and forth for a minute, and that made a nice countersink to fit the screw head. Just tighten these gently. Don't overdo it. There. All installed. And as it turns out, I haven't filed down the bottom of this plate enough for these wheels to turn freely, so now I can take it back off and go back to what I was doing before this. Okay, I filed a little bit out of the bottom of that plate, and now the wheels are turning freely. And while I was spinning the things around, observing them, I think you can see, just watching closely there, that these wheels actually move around quite a bit. They were not pressed on straight at the factory. So if I leave these things as they are, this thing's just gonna waddle down the track like an injured penguin, so let's see if I can do something about that. Alright, so since these wheels are plastic, I found that I can kind of bend them into shape and get them rolling at least straighter than they were before. It's still not perfect, but it's better. So I just kind of rolled them around and marked the wide spot so that I could keep an eye on that. Now this one needs it, so what I was doing with the first one is just kind of hold on to that spot with my thumb, and then insert this flat blade screwdriver at the opposite side. And I just kind of force it like that. Then test it every now and then. That seems to be straighter. So now I'll do that last one. We'll see if this rolls smoothly. All right, so it's not perfect, but it did at least help straightening those wheels out. I think it'll still kind of waddle back and forth a bit, especially around curves, but at least it won't be as bad as what it was going to be. All right, so now I think I can put on the side rods. And for these screws here, Arbour Models didn't provide the correct size of tool. Of course, I figured I could just use the Bowser tool I always use because those fit all other American-made kits that I've built up to this point, except for this one. They decided to use a different screw size, of course. So I went ahead and got a proper nut driver here. So I'll start just by lining that up there. There are two different lengths of these. The shorter ones go in front on the geared axle. Screw that in. Now a long one for the back. Since this is just a four-wheeled engine, I'm hoping that leaves less room for error on Arbour's part. But we'll see. Seems like they were pretty good at messing up the small things. Come on. Oh, sure, I put a nut in this hole. Yeah, it's there. Alright, so I did eventually get it on. I found it was just the plating in the wheel there was blocking the screw from going in as far as it needed. And seems to be binding, especially hard right there. Let's see if I can find what's causing that. Okay, so I took the right side rod off of there. I think the problem is that these holes just needed to be expanded a little bit or elongated, so I just have a 3/32 drill bit in there. And I'm just carefully going at it by hand to open up the hole a little bit more. Things improved a little by reaming out the holes in the rods, but I still couldn't get it perfect, so I decided to check the wheels with my Northwest Shortline quartering tool and found that they are, in fact, off by a few degrees. So I'm just pulling this off most of the way and making sure things are as perfectly lined up as possible. Let's get that onto there. And since the wheels are plastic, I can actually press it back on there by hand. All right, so even with the quartering and a little more work on the rods, I still can't seem to get the binds 100% out of it for some reason. I've done the best I can here. Maybe there's just something I'm missing, but I'll have to come back to that later. So I'll just finish these off with a bit of oil. After a little more observation, I found out that the rods were actually just slightly too short, or at least the holes in them were. So after elongating the holes towards the edges, just a little at each end, I think I've almost completely taken care of the binds. Still not 100% perfect, but now I can roll it in either direction by the gear, and it seems to do it without seizing. So with that taken care of, now I'll just put the cylinders on so that I can match the progress of the Bowser 482 chassis. Of course, before putting these on, I just have to get rid of some of this flash that's around them, so gently file a few spots. I definitely need to clean out the square area here so that it fits properly to the chassis. It looks like most of the outside is pretty clean already, which is good. Just take off a few bits here and there. That'll be good enough. And then little more around the bottom there. Just finishing things up with a bit of sanding here and there. For the fronts of those cylinders, I think it'll be easier to sand it like this. Well, I'll just say that's good enough. Doesn't feel rough at all, so I think that'll smooth out with paint. Now there's just these last two holes, which also need to be drilled and tapped for those 080 screws. Not drilling all the way through with these like I did for the frame. Just going up to the ends of the holes, because I don't think the screws are actually going to go all the way through. No countersinking to the holes in the frame, but I think I'm supposed to use the flathead ones here. Alright, so these holes in the frame do need countersinking for those screws. I don't want to keep using the Phillips screwdriver like I did for that one hole in the frame. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take a larger drill bit and I'll put that into my drill and just slowly drill it that until it forms a nice cone. I think that'll be good. Oh yeah, that's much better. The screw head actually fits flat now, and there's a little more threading coming up through the bottom. So now I'll just take two of these, and I guess I'd better make sure that these cylinders actually fit correctly in here, which actually, there's some metal in there too, so I need to file that out. Still not perfectly flat. Instead of filing more out of the frame, what I'll do instead is file an angle into the front edge of the cylinders here, or a bevel, I guess you'd want to call it. Yeah, those are sitting nice and flat now. Let's see if the screws go in. Okay, good. So the holes did line up. I was actually a little concerned there because I forgot to check on that first. All right, and there it is with the cylinders on. So there was quite a bit of trouble getting to this point, but I think this is turning out nicely so far. It should make for a fairly smooth runner. So that'll be it for this video, and in the next one I'll work on the rest of the crossheads and side rods and see about getting that working smoothly.